Hey everyone, today's a bit of a different video as I want to try some new stuff out, and I don't want to just be limited to talking about films. I also want to do TV, and specifically episodes of TV that move me a lot and impact me a lot. And I recently finished both seasons of the FX show The Bear on Disney Plus, and they were unbelievable. This show, after only 2 seasons, is, I would say, one of my favourite TV shows of all time. And I've wanted to talk about The Bear since I watched it. I just needed to figure out which episode to do. With the release of season 2, we received the masterful and extremely chaotic Bizarro family Christmas episode, 7 Fishes, or the beautiful episode that follows Richie as he comes to terms with himself, titled Forks. Now, although I think 7 Fishes specifically is by far the best episode of the show, and also one of the best episodes of TV I think I've ever watched, with its incredible writing and amazing acting, I think there's just way too much in that episode to unpack, and I think that I'd be here for days trying to analyse its multi-layered and nuanced writing. So today I'll be talking about perhaps my favourite episode of the show, that being the penultimate episode of season 1, titled Review, which is tense, expertly written, and has one of the most effective uses of one-takes that I've ever seen. The episode starts with a live version of Sufjan Stevens' song Chicago. The song accompanies a montage of clips displaying the city of Chicago. This montage almost acts as the calm before the storm, presenting the beauty and serenity of Chicago life, before it is all ruined and the pieces fractured in the later events of the episode. The montage also features clips of Chicago's history, some of these being unpleasant, occasionally flashing to clips of rioting, mirroring how quickly something so calm can become something so stressful, which also relates to this episode. This montage reminds me of the montage used at the start of the This Is England TV miniseries, both of which represent the chosen area's history, beauty and problems. After Chicago ends, we then cut to Inside the Beef. The episode from here on out is all filmed in one single take, signifying the rising tension between everyone in the shop. Ibrahim is reading a foods critic review of the beef that has been printed in the paper. The review praises the reliability and staff of the beef, but has a specific focus on a dish that isn't actually on the menu. This is the dish that in the previous episode Sydney had been asking Carmy to try, and when she eventually became fed up and tired of waiting for him, unknowingly gave it to a customer, who was this critic. As Carmy enters and Sydney desperately attempts to stop Ibrahim from reading the review, she approaches Carmy and tries to explain the situation to him. The review is the disruption for this episode. It acts as a catalyst, and although Carmy shrugs it off and labels it as good for business, he is offended as it undermines his professional ego. I believe this episode is so cleverly written as every character's flaws are on display, and it conveys how this group of people aren't a cohesive team that can successfully work together yet. As preparation for the day gets underway, Tina arrives with her son, who has been excluded from school. Over the course of the first season, Tina has had a lot of growth. She went from being a stubborn woman who wouldn't listen to Sydney, almost looking down on her as if she believed that she was better. However, when she started to see how Sydney never seemed to let the bullying get to her, and how nice Sydney remained even when Tina wasn't, she began to change. She started to follow the rules that Sydney had previously set, and actually began to get along with her. Now in this episode, Tina brings her son, who has been suspended from school, to the kitchen. She wants Sydney to show him as well how to behave and how to work as a team, just as Sydney showed her. However, by doing this and bringing a distraction into the workplace, specifically on a stressful day like this when the crew are testing a new system, we can see that although Tina has had character growth and began to learn how to work as a team, she still isn't completely aware on how to be a productive member of one. Shortly after, Sydney and Richie start arguing about the review. He sarcastically says it was a coincidence that Sydney gave her dish to the critic. The argument that follows shows how Richie is afraid of change. He is holding on to the last memory of Mikey that he has, that being the beef, and he doesn't like how Sydney is trying to make changes to it, and he resents her for it. More on these two later. Midway through the argument, Tina shouts out, and it is revealed that Sydney has left the pre-order option open. The crew now has to prepare an enormous amount of food that they don't have. Wilco's 10-minute song, Spiders, then fades in. A song that gradually builds and builds until eventually it results in a cacophony of noise, much like the characters in this episode. This moment is where Carmy's biggest flaw is displayed. Carmy appears to be at first quite calm with the situation and seems to understand that the review was a mistake on Sydney's behalf. However, when he realises that Sydney has left the pre-order option open, this facade that he has put up falls. Carmy deep down is quite a selfish man. He needs to do things his way, and if they're done by anyone else, they aren't done correctly. As soon as anything goes wrong in Carmy's life, he seems to shut down, resent people, and almost block everyone out of his life. This is exactly what he does in this episode. He pushes everyone away, shouting at Sydney and loudly ordering her to stop attempting to help and to leave his expo. As Sydney leaves Carmy's station, she passes by Marcus, who still seems to be working on his donuts. This whole time, Marcus has become so obsessed and wrapped up in pursuing this dream of his, of creating the most beautiful cake creations that he sees in his cookbooks, that he is actually beginning to neglect the role that he needs to complete in the kitchen. There are numerous times where Carmy or Sydney ask him about the cakes, and Marcus still doesn't complete his tasks. The cakes that the beef actually need to sell haven't been cut into slices minutes before they need to be sent out, and when asked about this, he simply procrastinates, saying he will do it in a minute. Marcus and Sydney are very alike. They are both very in tune with their ideas of their future, and they know exactly what they want. However, they go about it in different ways. Although Sydney seems to not let go of some of her ideas, even when it's for the best, she always remains in the present, doing the best she can in her current role. Marcus, on the other hand, is so obsessed with his dreams that he seems to forget that he actually has a role that needs to be completed. Sydney then prepares to complete Marcus's work and gets into another argument with Richie. Sydney's flaw is her confidence and her aspirations. She doesn't seem to know when to stop pestering Carmy and to leave the idea of this new dish alone for a bit. She wants to be an amazing chef, but doesn't realise that you can't go straight to the top. You need to be patient. After her mistake of leaving the pre-order option open sends the kitchen into chaos, we can see that Sydney, whilst working with Carmy, has adopted some of his negative traits. She starts being really quite mean to people. For example, Tina, who Sydney worked so hard to be on good terms with, gets aggressively shut down when all she was trying to do was look out for Sydney. And Tina is quite taken aback by this new attitude that Sydney has adopted, saying, "This isn't you." Richie then also attempts to help Sydney with her work, and she lashes out to him as well, repeatedly calling him a loser, unleashing cruel insults on him and labelling him as incompetent at everything he does. I think Richie is the most nuanced character in The Bear. There is something so deeply interesting about his character, and I think that Richie's flaw, as implied later on in season 2, is that he constantly lives in an existential crisis. Richie has always lived in Mikey's jet stream, almost as his echo, which we can see quite literally in the flashback in episode 6. Richie just seems to repeat everything that Mikey says. However, since Mikey died, it's almost like Richie doesn't know what to do with his life, and how to be an individual person, which is evident in this episode. Richie is just there. He doesn't seem to have a specific job, and he just wanders around making jokes and getting on Sydney's nerves. See, Richie is jealous of Sydney and how she is young and driven, something that he isn't. So when Richie hears about the review, he sees it as a way to drive a wedge between Carmy and Sydney, because he feels alone and unliked. However, when Carmy starts shouting and ordering people to do their jobs, Richie does whatever he can to help. I think that this is why Richie is such an interesting character. Behind his wall of toughness, jokes and immaturity, he's actually a lovable person and someone who wants to help. Whilst attempting to help, he crosses paths with Sydney, who isn't in the best of moods with him, or anyone for that matter. When she sees Richie doing the work that she has been assigned, it angers her. She starts to ridicule Richie, calling him a loser and a waste of space, which just validates Richie's deepest insecurities, and feeds the anxiety deep inside of him. For once, Richie's wall falls down, and he honestly tells Sydney that she is being mean, before quickly reverting to his tough guy persona again. This argument and confusion around the kitchen leads to Sydney accidentally stabbing Richie in the leg. The kitchen is now in full chaos, signified by the song reaching its peak. When Marcus starts showing Carmy his donuts, still not aware of the situation around him, Carmy angrily smashes his donuts on the floor. Marcus, now enraged, leaves his station and Sydney packs up her stuff and quits, telling Carmy,
"You are an excellent chef.
What are you doing?
You are also a piece of shit."
Carmy then tries a piece of Marcus's donut off the floor, surprised by how good it is, before smashing the ticket machine and getting back to work. Cut to black. I think this episode is genuinely a masterpiece. It's interesting that Christopher Storer chose to use live recordings of both of the songs used in this episode. For me, it adds a sense of realism, and much like live music performances, everything is on show in this episode. The camera work is excellent, fluidly moving between this small kitchen space in one long continuous take. The acting is top tier, everyone manages to stay perfectly in character and brings so much raw emotion the whole episode. The writing is just flawless, allowing us to delve even deeper into all of these brilliant characters. I love it.